Good afternoon, everyone. It is Thursday. You're on the Thursday edition of UncoverDC with Tracy Beans, here live, WSMN, and live all over the internet. It's a very interesting show I've got for you today, and you're really going to want to make sure you listen to every last word that Ekim Alptekin says today. He's our guest, but the show is brought to you by biotech. Did you know that after the age of 20, your body produces about 10% less collagen each passing decade? The visible result ends up being the appearance of wrinkles, flaky skin, hair loss, and dirty nails as we age. That's why ageless multi-collagen was created. I use this every day. I put it in my coffee. It has literally no taste. It's like a powder sort of a substance. I can't even necessarily say powder. It's more like crystals, but it's really, really great because your nails are stronger, your hair is stronger. Get ageless multi-collagen for 51% off plus free shipping by going to healthwithbeans.com, or you can click the link in the description box below if you're watching on socials. But if you're listening on the treasured radio station WSMN, you can go to healthwithbeans.com. Real quick, before we get into the interview today, I just wanted to give a little backstory. I have been following the case of General Flynn since the day that he took his plea deal. When you have a guest like Ekim, who is going to be joining us in a second here, he is the gentleman who owned the company called Innovo. And if any of you guys know, one of the things the left comes at General Flynn with all the time is this story about how he cooperated with the Turkish government and the FARA violation. He's a traitor. This is what Sullivan said about him. Well, Innovo is the company that hired the Flynn intel group to do the work about the coup in Turkey and Gulen and all of that stuff. That the story that nobody really understands of this saga, the FARA violation, the engine by which they threatened Mike Flynn Jr. with prosecution, the fact that they wanted General Flynn to lie in order to testify against his former business partner and Ekim. This is a part of the story that has not been talked about enough, and this is Ekim's second interview because he is right now under indictment for 6 counts in a completely bogus prosecution where his co-defendant was convicted by a jury, and it was so egregious that the judge overturned that criminal conviction. I never expected to be sitting with Ekim. And so when we were put in contact with one another, it was really awesome because this is a perspective that you have not heard yet. And I'm telling you right now, there's a lot of little nuggets because we just recorded this interview. There's a lot of nuggets in here that you're going to want your pen and pencil and your paper to write down. There's some really, really interesting information in this interview, particularly when it pertains to former CIA directors and some folks that are stepping up right now to help Joe Biden. You're not going to want to miss it. So without further ado, support this guy because seriously, this is just absolutely absurd. Very carefully listen to this story of Ekim Alptekin from Turkey. And you guys might not know that name, but I'm hoping that by the end of this interview, you're very familiar with Ekim and what he's been through. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Tracy. Great to be here on the show.
Thanks. And we're going to go through today with everybody what you were the owner of Innovo, right?
That's correct.
So Innovo, for everyone out there, is the company that contracted with Flynn Intel Group for the Turkey work that General Flynn and his business partner did during the election season. But there's a lot more to the story than just that. So we were just talking before we got on air. I want you to explain what you explained to me to the listeners out there, Ekim.
Yeah, so as I told you, there's an analogy between what happened in Turkey in the past and what I think is happening now in the United States. And it's basically in Turkey, during the Cold War years, we had a proper coup almost every 10 years. And these coups were U.S.-backed because it was either that the American administration felt that the government in office in Turkey was too left-wing or too religious or too something. But in the late 90s, we had something that most Turkey analysts refer to as a postmodern coup. And back then, it wasn't really tanks on the streets, but it was very similar to what we're seeing in the United States. So it's basically that the establishment, including the intelligence community, the media elite, the security bureaucracy, don't like the person in office. So they think the election was a train accident, basically. And they think the person in office is a national security risk for the country, and everything should be done to first prevent him from coming into office, and then later, if they don't manage to do that, to undermine him, to prevent him from effectively governing, basically. And I think that's really what's happening in the United States, and many people fail to see that. And I think for a Turkish audience, it's easier, and I think it also explains why President Erdogan, already in 2017, is the only international leader who made a comment saying that his counterpart is the elected person in the United States. And he referred to this postmodern coup in Turkey, and he said that something like that is going on in the United States. And he made it clear that he will not accept any other counterpart than the democratically, legitimately elected person, which is President Trump. And many people in international media either missed that comment, didn't understand what it meant, but I think we now all do. We now exactly know what it means.
Which is, yeah, I mean, it's blatant now. I mean, it's anybody who denies this is going on is in a different universe. And so, for people out there, you were charged by the Mueller Special Counsel. You are right now in the midst of a criminal case, correct?
That's correct.
So
I was indicted late 2018.
You were indicted with Bijan Rafekian, correct?
Yes.
And
the only reason that General Flynn wasn't indicted is because he was supposedly cooperating, but they wanted him to lie. So just before the trial of Bijan Rafekian, he backed off. He changed lawyers. His previous legal counsel was corrupt. And when he finally got good legal representation with Sidney Powell, you might recall that she told Brandon Van Grack, the prosecutor, that he wants her client to lie. So when that happened, they tried to make him a defendant again in our case, in our trial, which at that point our judge did not accept.
You got very lucky with your judge.
Absolutely. Because everyone failed. I mean, the media failed. At some point, the public failed. The jury failed, even in Bijan's case.
Yep.
But in the end, the judge did not fail. He dismissed the case.
He dismissed the case. He overturned the criminal conviction, which is really unheard of, especially in the politicized times that we're in right now. It was a shock, and it just goes to show you how little they had. So let's walk through this story from the beginning. We have enough time. So you just start where you start with this, way back when you first decided something needed to be done about Fethullah Gulen and, what was going on in Turkey and how this whole thing happened.
So when in 2002, President Erdogan got elected, the Turkish establishment, which is a fiercely secular establishment, didn't like him, felt he was a national security risk. You have to imagine a situation where on national holidays at receptions, the Joint Chiefs refused to shake his hand. The head of intelligence refused to give him a briefing. So, similar things to what we're seeing now in the United States. So, he was desperate, I think, to find a human resource pool of civil servants, basically, that he could work with, who were loyal to the democratic constitutional order. And one of these groups was a religious group who infiltrated into Turkish government, especially into the police, for many years. And his mistake, of course, was that he trusted them. He thought, in the end, these guys are devout Muslims. In his belief, that meant that they would be good people and that they would stay loyal to the Constitution. But, they had a different plan. And they're called the Gulen movement. They call themselves the Hizmet movement. They're followers of Fethullah Gulen, in my opinion, a very, very dangerous radical Islamist. And at some point, when they didn't like, the status quo in Turkey anymore, they decided to get rid of him. So this went as far as them attempting a coup attempt in July 15, 2016. So this was a very big national trauma in Turkey. I mean, I remember that night I was on a dinner with my wife, and imagine you're sitting somewhere and F-16 start flying over you. Tanks are on the streets, people are shooting. It was very traumatic. I think it was worse for us in terms of what it did to the Turkish national psyche than the trauma that the Americans suffered on 9/11.
Wow.
Because it was in every city. It was really, it's very difficult to explain. So I started talking with many friends that I have in the United States. One of them is Bijan Rafekian, who was the business partner of General Flynn. I firmly believed, and I still do, that this is a very difficult topic to explain. And for an audience who doesn't know much about the topic, it sounds like something out of a Dan Brown novel. So I felt it's not very fruitful for us or for the government of Turkey to tell this story, because it's not going to make sense to an American audience. So I thought Americans should tell the story. And for them to feel, for credible Americans to tell the story, they should do their own independent, objective research. And I believed that General Flynn was in a unique position to do just that, because he'd been a former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He transformed the way intelligence globally works. He was a legend in his field. And I tried to convince the government of Turkey to basically commission this research to them, but they were very busy. It was just after the coup. General Flynn didn't have much time because he didn't want to have any commercial obligation on election day anymore. So he had about 3 months left. When the government of Turkey sort of dropped the ball, they never said no, and I actually believed that they would push through with it. But there was no time left anymore. So I decided to do a smaller version of what I thought that the government of Turkey should do. And I hired the Flynn Intel Group to do research about this radical Islamist group, whose leader is living in a fortified compound in the Poconos Mountains. It's like, doesn't get crazier than that.
No, it doesn't. That part of the story always gets me.
Yeah.
Before you go on, people listening are probably saying, well, who are you that you have connections to the Turkish government? Can you explain a little bit about that for people so they understand your background?
Sure. At the time, I was the chairman of the Turkey-United States Business Council, which is the oldest trade organization in Turkey, the oldest bilateral trade organization in Turkey. It's a very successful group. I think our members, and there are not many of them, produce about 70% of Turkey's national economy. So it's a voluntary membership-based organization, but it's been there for a very long time. And you have to understand, in a country where before this government came to office, our average term in office of any government was about 18 months. So in a country like that, organizations and civil society become more important because they have more continuity, at that time at least, than the government had. So this has traditionally been an organization that had serious resources and had a very big network, and the government of Turkey would interact with us on all sorts of issues. Think about it like it's like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I guess it's very similar.
Yes.
So we had the government's ear in a way because we produce 70% of the economy.
Yeah, understood. They had the same thing that we did a lot of research at the U.S.-Ukraine Business Council, and there's a lot of these like inter-country sort of relationships that help foster stability, like you're saying, and other things. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that you had a bigger role here than just, a random guy sitting on his couch and decides that he's going to.
Exactly. Yeah, because I was elected as chairman. So it means you raise your hand and you say, I want to invest in this relationship. And if you elect me to the members, I will do whatever it takes to strengthen this relationship. So when something as traumatic as this coup attempt happens, and the perpetrator lives in the United States, that was devastating for the Turkish-American relationship. And you can talk about trade, but imagine being the head of the Pakistan-United States Business Council, at the time that the American public knew bin Laden was in Pakistan. That wouldn't fly.
Right.
You can't talk about business if the entire country is upset about something else. So I knew that this obstacle had to be removed before we could do anything that was part of our mission.
Yeah, that's understandable. I completely get it. So you go to your friend in New York who happens to be General Flynn's business partner, knowing that General Flynn has the history that he has and what he's done, especially with Islamic extremism. It's been a focus of his for years. What happens next?
Exactly. So we decided on a 3-month contract that was largely about research. Last minute, they said we need a PR component and a lobbying component. It was more like they said, if we really find interesting results, we should probably give them to the press and not just to prosecutors, because we agreed that if there were any criminal things that we stumbled upon from open source research, that we should refer them to prosecutors. But they also said, there might be information that's not criminal, but that's still interesting for the public. We should hire a PR firm. Similarly, they said we might end up talking to people in the government. So this might have a lobbying arm to it. So we agreed to do that as well. In the end, they ended up doing very little on both angles. So there's one op-ed that the general wrote. He wrote it against my advice. When someone writes something, when a company that you hire writes an op-ed that you don't want to be published, it means you're not paying for it, right? So the prosecutor keeps insisting that he wrote that op-ed for me. It's simply not true. I received the op-ed 2 days ahead of time. I felt the op-ed was technically right on target, but I knew that if it would get published, it would make General Flynn a target, and indirectly would make me a target. Because this group, these Gulenists, they're very powerful in the United States. They receive about $750 million, $750 million annually in school subsidies, because they manage almost 200 charter schools in the United States. And 60 Minutes and other research has shown from the media and from State Department, other places in the past, has shown that they are engaged in visa fraud and in rent fraud. So they take back part of this money that they pay for salaries to these people to their followers that they import as English teachers, as if you cannot find an English teacher in the United States.
This is H-1B visa, right?
Yes, exactly. And they take back part of that money. So they pay them high salaries, but then they take back 30 to 40% of that money. So if you're getting $750 million in subsidies, you're paying rent and salaries, and you're skimming part of that money back into your own organization, that's a lot of money. So I knew that they were hiring a lot of powerful lobbying firms and PR firms. One of them is Podesta. That name might ring a bell with you, because Tony Podesta is the brother of John Podesta, who was the chief of staff of Hillary Clinton. So I knew that if that op-ed would get published, he would fall in their radar, and they would heavily antagonize against him. And that's exactly what happened. So
you know that the Podesta firm got shut down and there was never any charges against them for anything, right?
The only reason they shut them down is that, they said if we're going to prosecute General Flynn and others, the only thing that we can sort of falsely accuse them of is the FARA violation. Mm-hmm. So if we do that, in the case of Podesta, it's clear he's violated FARA multiple times. In General Flynn's case, he did not, but they're pretending he did. So it's really, it's so upsetting. It's difficult to convey to the audience how crazy this all is. But he got away with it, so they could prosecute us. They just asked him to close his company.
And he did. And, this is what happens. And it shocked everybody was a little bit upset. Everyone's upset that it seems to be justice is tilted in only one way. But there's a lot of minutia here in your case that I really want to get into today that doesn't normally get talked about. So, for example, the prosecution against General Flynn, in his case, they had him sign, the plea about FARA. They were going to use him as a witness against you, and
mm-hmm.
and he refused to lie. He was asked to lie in that case. He was asked to say he knowingly lied on a form when he didn't do that. And like you said, his attorneys were corrupt. But what on earth are they charging you with?
They're saying they're 6 counts. 4 of them are counts of lying. They're saying that I lied on 4 issues, which is not true. I mean, these are things like I said I don't work for the government of Turkey, which I don't. So they say lie number 1. I say that I paid for the contract myself, which is true. Lie number 2. So it's things like that. And the other 2 counts, one of them is conspiracy to violate the Foreign Agent Registry Act, which is a transparency law. I mean, there's nothing difficult about filing FARA, and there's no reason why you shouldn't. And I can't imagine anyone wanting to go to jail not to,
file
Yeah, I mean, it's something, I mean, you only have to file, and you can file retroactively as well, so there's no crime really there. They're saying that we conspired to not to file, even though we ended up filing, some crazy argument like that. And the other thing is, it's called Section 951, which is like espionage light. It's acting as a foreign agent, they call it. The literature says it's sort of like espionage light, which means I must be the biggest spy master in the universe because I was basically running the national security advisor of the United States.
This is the thing. Like, it's so ridiculous. Now, obviously, we know Bijan went to trial, and now what happened with you? Because I've been in this case and I've been reading the docket since the beginning. Where are you in this? What is going on with your portion?
Yeah, the thing is, I would stand trial as well if I had presented myself, if I had surrendered myself to the court, which I didn't, because before the trial started, I understood that they're not interested in the truth. It's like this. These Peter Strzok messages, or it was this other guy, I forgot, who said, like, what are we out to do here? Are we interested in the truth, or are we trying to get him fired and get him to lie or something like that? So when I felt that pressure, it's a very big risk if you have a business, if you have 3 children, a couple of dogs. I mean, how do you go to the United States and surrender yourself to a justice system that's politicized? I mean, I know I did nothing wrong, but they were clearly out to do something else. I knew I could get away with it, with the entire case if I only agreed to say what they wanted me to say. And my initial lawyer, who I think was planted because he volunteered, he called me out of the blue. And I later found out that he was a former colleague of Brandon Van Grack, this prosecutor who also went after General Flynn. Yeah, he made me go in, volunteer to go in, and have this interview, and that little thing cost me 20 more years of prison ask in the indictment, because that's how they got to the 4 counts, because everything I said there, they said was a lie, although I told them the truth. And there's one interesting thing, Tracy. During Bijan Kian's trial, Bijan's lawyers asked the FBI agent who was on the stand under oath, they said, you're suggesting that Ekim Alptekin lied. Did you do anything to investigate whether he was telling the truth? And the answer was no. And they repeat the question, and he says no again. They did not even ask Turkey for my bank records. And I paid the company through my Turkish bank account. I gave them, my bank information and everything, but they didn't double check what I told them. And the only reason I can think of why they would do that is if they don't want to run into exculpatory evidence. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
One of the.
I worked in law enforcement, Tracy. I worked at Interpol headquarters in counterterrorism. It's a long time ago, but I mean, under normal circumstances, if you have a high-profile case like this and you don't believe the witness, you're going to double check. Why not? There's mutual legal assistance treaties between Turkey and the United States. Why not at least try?
Well, exactly, because you said exactly right. They're afraid they're going to run into exonerating evidence. And then, especially if they did that so early on, the entire case would have fallen apart. They wouldn't have had anything political to wield. And that's what, I mean, that Brandon Van Grack connection is something else. That's the first time I've heard that.
He interviewed me. He was the one interviewing me.
I'm interested to see what happens with him, because he obviously dropped off the Flynn case, and he's still involved in another case they're doing to get like the search warrants that were filed and stuff like that. But he's the one thing that they have always used, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that there was a meeting set up between, it was a very quick meeting, right, with somebody in Turkish government and General Flynn.
Yeah.
Tell us about that. How is that?
I'll tell you exactly how that went. And I feel so bad for General Flynn and for the other people involved, because I really pushed that meeting. because I was there as the chairman of this trade organization. We always go there every September, and we have business events in the margins of the United Nations General Assembly. So we've been doing that for decades. And while we're in town, obviously the American administration is there, the Turkish delegation is there. I thought it was a good opportunity for me to introduce the relevant ministers and General Flynn, because I was hoping that they would continue this contract after me. At that time, I was already engaged with them. Imagine a government, they're saying that the government of Turkey paid for this. Imagine a government paying someone that they've never met. It's unheard of. I mean, they would never. I can tell you, I know the Turkish government very well. I never worked for them, but I've interacted with them a lot. They would never hire a company that they've never met. And the first time they meet General Flynn and Bijan Rafekian and two others, it was September 19th. It was in the margins of the UN General Assembly. And I had to convince both sides and push really hard to go to that meeting. So I think General Flynn felt I was a nice guy, didn't want to say no to me. I mean, I was a customer after all. And the Turkish side didn't want to say no to the chairman of a trade organization that produces 70% of the economy. I think we met around 9 p.m. after both delegations were finished with their official meetings. The meeting didn't last longer than an hour. The problem is Jim Woolsey was there, former CIA director who was in the Flynn Intel Group board of advisors or something. And this guy, the next day, through a very murky interlocutor, someone I don't like very much, and I later found out all sorts of stuff about him. He approached me through that individual and asked for a meeting about a separate contract. And I had difficulty believing it because I'd just seen him the night before as part of the Flynn Intel Group. I didn't even believe that this individual was really in contact with Jim Woolsey. So I just told him, just to double check, I said, why don't you bring him over and we'll just have a chat? And they came to the Turkish delegation's hotel. Jim Woolsey came with his late wife, and they very aggressively asked me to hire them. And I said, look, and they asked for a $10 million contract to discredit this imam living in the Poconos Mountains, which is not something that I'm against, to be honest. I think he deserves to be discredited. But I didn't have that kind of a budget. And I said, this is something that the government of Turkey should do. I can't hire you. I already spent my resources on the Flynn Intel Group, and I thought you were part of that contract. So he was trying to basically steal this business from General Flynn. His wife was very aggressive. We never spoke afterwards. And then 7 months later, I see on Wall Street Journal and then later on CNN that he accused us of discussing a potential kidnapping. That we were discussing whisking away at night this imam from the Poconos Mountains. It's such a crazy allegation. Imagine a few cabinet ministers with the incoming national security advisor discussing a kidnapping on U.S. soil. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Nobody, even if General Flynn would volunteer to do it for free, nobody would pay for that. Nobody wants to kidnap this guy. What are you going to do with him afterwards? I mean, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And the idea that a former CIA director would overhear something like this in a meeting, and he's lying through his teeth because he said he came in later. He didn't come in later. And I told the prosecutor, I told Brandon Van Grack, you can check the limousine hours, you can check his cell phone time. They have means that we don't have. I hired an investigator, paid another $10,000 for that. But the camera records of the hotel were erased.
Of course.
But I'm sure that Van Grack wanted to, he would be able to find those records because, he has access to NYPD records and all sorts of stuff. So the guy was lying. He was there the entire meeting. We never discussed anything like that. It didn't even come up as a joke or anything. And imagine if it had come up. Do you think this guy would meet me the day after in a hotel to discuss another contract? A former CIA director, you would expect him to go to the police immediately or to go to a prosecutor. There was one smart journalist who actually asked him, he said, why didn't you do something? I mean, why are you here now, 7 months later, telling the story? And he said, why? I informed Joe Biden through a friend. I mean, if my mother would say that, I would maybe believe it. But a former CIA director, he doesn't know what to do. He should have picked up the phone, called the FBI or someone. I mean, imagine I've been in D.C., in and out of the United States for several times afterwards. I've lived with my family there for several months in that same period. Do you think if we were discussing illegal action on U.S. soil and a former CIA director in good conscience overheard this discussion, do you think I would be able to get in and out of the United States? It makes no sense whatsoever.
It's always come down to the fact of either these people are just ridiculously incompetent or they're nefarious and I don't know which is worse for the United States, if they're this stupid or if they're nefarious. I'm not sure. But it's clear that the entire concocted story is just for one reason and one reason only. And you're now this poor guy, like honestly, stuck in the middle of this. And all you're trying to do is help your country with the help of our country. And the contract didn't even go well from what I read and gather. Like you weren't even happy with the results, really. Is that right or wrong?
No, that's also wrong. I mean, this guy who testified, a deputy director FBI who worked with Comey and then resigned somewhere in May and then was working for the Flynn Intel Group later. I think he was he may have been planted. I don't know. He was in that meeting. He was the fourth person in that meeting. During the trial, he didn't approve what Woolsey said, but he said other outrageous things. He said that I asked him to plant evidence against this imam. So supposedly I asked him, does the FBI have anything against this imam? And apparently he said no. I did ask that question. He said yes, but he's saying under oath during a trial that he said no. And he says that my follow-up question was, can we plant evidence against him? Now, imagine again, if that was true, why wasn't I arrested? Why was I allowed to leave the country? A deputy director FBI is faced with this question, to do something illegal, to plant evidence against a legal permanent resident in the United States. Why did he not do what he was supposed to do? I mean, as you said, it's either gross negligence or it's something nefarious, and I think it's the latter.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Who was the deputy director that testified? Do you remember the name? Yes,
it's Brian McCauley. Brian McCauley. And he worked with Comey, and I don't know why they hired him at the time, but he was lying to his feet. I actually think he's not part of a bigger conspiracy. I think they just pressured him. They probably just said, you're going to be a co-conspirator in this case unless you cooperate. And, I think he knows what that means. And he just came up with a few incriminating things, hoping it's all going to go away at some point. Well, it's not going away. They want to put me in prison for 35 years. And it's partly because people like him lied, and it's not okay. It's not okay. I have 3 children, and I'm going to fight until the end to make sure the American public understands what happened.
Yeah, it's important. And that's why, again, I'm really glad that we're talking with you today because, there's so many facets to this story that people don't really understand just yet and have just been kind of swept under the rug. In the Bijan trial, was there a forensic accountant that testified? Do you remember that?
There was a forensic guy, but not a financial one. I don't think so. No, they didn't. Okay. They subpoenaed my financial records, and those records prove what I was saying. But as I said, they never double checked these records in Turkey.
So you just provided them voluntarily because they were subpoenaed. Well, you were subpoenaed for them, obviously, but they didn't even go right to the bank.
No. And they had every resource to do so. They would need the Turkish government's cooperation, but I have no doubt that it would be provided. Why not? I mean, if there's anyone other than me that dislikes this case, and they probably blame me for it, it's the government of Turkey, because I'm accused of acting on their behalf. Well, if there's anyone who really knows for a fact that that's not true, it's the government of Turkey. And they remember, of course, that I pushed them to take that meeting. So you can imagine that the government of Turkey is not happy with me either. They think, I'm involved in something that's giving them a headache.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a rough spot to be in. Why would the Woolseys of the world have any involve? Like, why would they want for this guy to be able to stay in Pennsylvania with his 260 charter schools? Like, it almost seems like they're working against the exposure of Fethullah Gulen. Why would they want him to continue being able to do what he's doing?
Well, this guy came in, they call it voluntary, he left Turkey because of an indictment in Turkey. I would call it that he fled Turkey. He was a fugitive. He was denied a visa first by the court, but then during appeal, former CIA officers like Graham Fuller and high-level Clinton appointees intervened and vouched for him. And he ended up getting, after a long period, he ended up getting his permanent status as a resident in 2008. But it started, he went there during the Clinton years, and Woolsey is the Clinton-appointed CIA director. And Woolsey told me himself when I asked him about the Gulenists, I said, why is CIA so keen, to continue working with this group? Because they've sort of lost their purpose, I always felt. Especially after the coup. But he said it's not just about Turkey. He said they have, at the time, I don't think it's true anymore, but I'm just saying what he told me. But he said they have more than 1,000 schools globally, some of them in areas that are difficult to penetrate for an intelligence organization like the CIA. And he also said that because of the way they're structured, that, there's no clear membership, there's no clear mission, they have all these front organizations. It's an ideal group. I'm not sure if I can say this on the radio, but he said they're a wet dream for any intelligence organization.
Yeah.
And now he's not talking about that anymore. That's what he told me in person.
See, this is interesting, and I think it goes deeper. You're trying to get things on the up and up, keep stability, make sure that your people are flourishing, businesses are flourishing. There's good U.S.-Turkey relations. And then there's this sort of underground, nefarious sort of a web that's super important. And then you have a General Flynn who was going to upset that apple cart to begin with. And it was like basically the perfect storm between all of you guys. So it makes sense why they latched on to this Farah thing now. And I got to be honest, there's a whole lot of rumor out there and nonsense out there. And they always come back to this. Well, he was working on behalf of Turkey. And there's no proof at all. It didn't happen. And you're the man who brokered the entire deal. And now you are on the hook for 35 years. If you were, what would happen if you were to set foot in the United States today?
I would be arrested. I would go to county jail probably. And according to my lawyers, that would be a very rough place to be for me. Probably end up getting a few tattoos. It's not a place you want to be in, Tracy. According to the New York Times, 98% of people accused of a federal crime end up pleading guilty in the United States. 98%. And
yep.
I never understood that percentage. I always felt it's weird because you don't have that anywhere in the world. But now I understand it because the prosecution is so powerful in the United States. First off, you need millions of dollars. I mean, the estimate for me when I started out was between $5 and $15 million if I go to trial. I mean, who has that amount of money, and who, even if you have it, you want to spend it on a trial like this? And second, you're probably going to end up, at least a year, maybe longer in jail. So, I mean, if you have children, if you have a career, it's devastating. It already is devastating for me. I mean, no bank wants to open a bank account with you. No, decent company wants to engage in trade with you. I mean, they know the power that they have and they abuse it, and you end up. I admitted this to Lee Smith before, and I spoke to him for his book. That I'm really ashamed to admit it, but at some point after General Flynn was cooperating, I was tempted to cooperate. I was tempted just to lie and just so I could get on with my life. But in the end, I decided not to. I felt, I'm not going to be able to look myself in the eye anymore. So I decided to fight.
I actually just read that portion of Lee's book because I'm reading it. I'm interviewing him on Monday, and the quote from your dad. What was that quote?
Yeah, my dad always said, if you're not a man of principles, you're not a man. And he said a principle is only a principle if you apply it when it doesn't suit you.
Yep.
So, and I told Lee that, when I was contemplating this issue, that, I thought of my dad who passed away early 2016. So it was very recent. And in many ways, I felt like he was looking over my shoulder in terms of, what I would do. And I know he lived through difficult times here in Turkey. And he's known in Turkey as someone who did the right thing always. So I decided to follow his footsteps. It's
really, really, really hard to do the right thing when you're faced with all of this and this overwhelm. I mean, your family has likely suffered immensely because of this. You were unable to do business the way you used to be doing it. You're on the hook for a charge or charges in the United States that all of which are lies. And, here you are just kind of, I'm not going to lie and I refuse to do it come hell or high water, no matter what they do to me. That's really hard. What did your wife think about all this?
Well, I try to keep her out of the limelight, and she's a very private person, but she sticks with me, and it's very difficult for her too, because we were living in the Netherlands. I was traveling back and forth. Now I can't travel anymore to the Netherlands. Not that I think that the Netherlands would evidence, and my guess is that they would conclude that this is nonsense and they would not extradite me. But that process would take a year and a half. And at best, I would be in house arrest in the Netherlands, and I would not be able to travel, which means I wouldn't be able to provide for my family. So I'm stuck in Turkey, there in the Netherlands, and it's difficult for my wife as well. That's not something she signed up for. She's not political like me. She doesn't come from a political family. But thank God I have a very strong woman by my side. She's stuck with me, and she knows. I mean, we spent Christmas with Bijan's family. Her first reaction, I'll never forget, was, she wasn't thinking about us. She was thinking about them because they're there. She said, how are they going to manage this nonsense? I'm very lucky to have my wife by my side.
That's really great, because sometimes, those things fracture relationships. And at least in the Flynn case, all of these folks have, you and General Flynn and their family have managed to really get closer through all of it. And now, there's tension, because I'm looking at the case, right, and there's document requests that are going unheeded, and the Flynn Intel group, the Flynn portion of it, apparently seems to be arguing with the Kian portion of the business about who gets what paperwork. How are relations there? Is everybody on okay footing, or are there people angry, or can you even speak to that?
The thing is, the lawyers really very strongly, not advise against, that's not even the right word, they demand that you don't talk to each other. So, it's so bad at some point, after Bijan initially was convicted by the jury, I just wanted to give him a call and, just tell him how sorry I am. And I wasn't allowed to. And at some point it was Christmas, and we'd spent Christmas together before. And I just wanted to, I asked my lawyer, can I just call him and say Merry Christmas? And they told me, no, you can't, because, they'll use that against you. They'll say you were coordinating information. Christmas might be a code for something, whatever. So you should have zero contact. So it's so crazy that sometimes you meet a mutual friend and they say, I'll say hi to Bijan, and you end up saying, don't, don't, because, you don't want to put that person in danger, because he'll be subpoenaed. And they'll be like, what did you tell him? What was the tone of it? And so it just, it's all very difficult. I saw the Senate report, by the way, Tracy, today. You've seen that as well. I saw on Twitter that you commented on it.
Yeah.
And I saw in that report, they've taken some of the things in the indictment, some of the crazy accusations like the Woolsey stuff, and they've put that in there. And they just put footnotes from media in there. And it's just so crazy for a Senate committee to put outrageous allegations that even Brandon Van Grack did not put in the indictment, because he knew they were false, and he knew that in cross-examination we would kill them over it. He did not even indict us for it. But what they did, they put it in the media. The media arm of this entire conspiracy, or how you want to call it, as you know, is a very important arm. And what they did is they painted me as a very murky guy to make sure that every affiliation that General Flynn had with me would look very nefarious. The reality is there's nothing like that. And one of the things that I saw in the report is my supposed connection to a guy called David Zeiken. And by the way, I'm not saying that he's a bad guy. I've never met him. I've never interacted with him. directly or indirectly. I've never emailed him. I've never text messaged him. I never spoke on the phone with him. I've had zero interaction with this man whatsoever. But it's in mainstream media, it's a well-known fact. That's how they present it. But I coordinated this stuff with him, and he has connections to Russian intelligence or some crazy nonsense like this. I mean, at some point they asked me, the FBI asked me to draft a list of all the Russians I knew. I couldn't think of any name, not one.
I don't know any Russians. Oh man, Stoli.
And they're making me look like I'm an agent of Vladimir Putin or whatever. And now that this entire Steele dossier is discredited, they're pretending like their nose is bleeding. It's like, nobody ever said anything. But here you see it today even. It's coming back in the Senate report. It's absolutely crazy.
The Senate report is literally a piece of propaganda that they're using to keep this stupid collusion thing going as long as they possibly can. Not only that, but the person whose Twitter account they reference as being Konstantin Kilimnik is not even him. Aaron Mate, a reporter today, came out and said, I asked, it's not him. The amount of just complete straight up falsity. They're laundering the information into that Senate report the same way Steele used the media to launder information and the FBI did. It's
exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, it's the same thing over again. That Senate report, 960 pages, none of which really can be believed. This is such a stain on our history. And, there are so many innocent people that have been swept up in this. Anything else that you want to tell us that is interesting that you think that people should know?
Yeah, I mean, last week, an interview that the presidential nominee for the Democrats, Joe Biden, gave to the New York Times editorial board back, I think, in December, somehow was revisited. Someone shared it again. And the part about Turkey, he's, practically calling for a coup in Turkey. And somehow, when it was first published in December, in the video, they cut that part. It was serviced again last week. I don't know why and by who, but it created huge outrage in Turkey. Even the opposition. I mean, Joe Biden succeeded where everyone else failed in uniting the Turkish opposition and the government of Turkey, and being extremely angry that this man is calling for what amounts to a coup in Turkey. Why I think it's interesting for the American public, here we are, 4 years later after President Trump was elected. He's been dodging bullets from the first day that he was in office. He has not been able to effectively govern the way he would have otherwise if he had had the full support of his intelligence community, of his security bureaucracy, of all the other agencies within the United States government. I can assure you he would have been a much more successful president than he already is. Why did everyone suffer this? I mean, the world is suffering effectively because the United States is the most powerful country in the world. So when the United States is suffering, in many ways, the world is suffering. That's why, I remember my discussion with General Flynn. I said, I want President Trump to make America great again because it will make the world great again. When America is great, the world usually is great. So it's not something, when people say America first, I'm not offended by it at all. Anyways, the reason we've all suffered these 4 years is because supposedly there was foreign meddling in U.S. elections. And the party that really made this sort of their biggest issue is the Democratic Party. And here you have their nominee effectively calling for election meddling in another NATO country.
Yep.
I mean, how crazy is this? How crazy is this? And, people are just pretending, especially mainstream media, not to hear it.
It's something he's very good at doing. He meddles in other countries often. That word meddles keeps coming up. But Biden's been doing that for years and years and years very successfully. And, I think that the one thing...
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, I just wanted to say, they tried to reverse a national election. They did so by falsifying evidence, as people are pleading guilty to now. And they ran fake counterintelligence operations. There is no bigger crime.
No.
And General Flynn for them was the big kahuna, right? And people like me are collateral damage. But I think in the end they went too far and they got caught. But the problem is that their accomplices in the media are downplaying what they did. So even though they got caught, the American public is not able to, to really see what happened because the media and other people are downplaying what really went on, and what's now a verifiable fact. It upsets me tremendously.
It should upset you. And the crazy thing is that this sort of like new media came about because people weren't getting truth from the places where they were typically used to getting it. And I've interviewed so far in this whole saga, I have interviewed Mike Flynn Jr., I've interviewed Joe Flynn, I have interviewed Svetlana Lokova, I've interviewed George Papadopoulos, I've talked with Carter Page, all these people that typically would have had a very, very big, wide stage to stand on and tell their story have been completely snuffed out because this legacy media machine that you've spoken about here has kept them from being able to tell the truth. So these platforms that we're using have grown immensely over the past 3 years because of that reason.
Exactly. And I think if Trump gets elected again, things will change because, again, we've seen this movie in Turkey. I mean, when Erdogan, first came to power, and the same thing happened to President Trump, leftovers from the previous sort of regime started leaking twisted or completely fabricated information to this corrupted media, which back then was controlled by political opponents of President Erdogan. And, law enforcement and prosecutors loyal to this establishment took these news stories to justify investigating and indicting and arresting, persecuting loyal patriots. And that's exactly what's happening in the United States. And in the end, these rogue agents, they sort of enjoy, I don't know how to really call it, but it's like a parallel chain of command that they use to prevent the democratically elected president from effectively governing. And we saw that in Turkey, and the same people who did that in Turkey are doing that now in their own country. This is a counterintelligence or an intelligence operation. It's a false flag operation with the full resources and the full experience that these people enjoyed, that they enjoy only because of U.S. taxpayers, by the way.
Yep.
And they're using this against the American public. I mean, that's really what's going on.
It is stunning to hear that. That's going to make a nice little clip for people to listen to because it's true and it's really scary to hear it out loud. When you talk about it, people make you out to be some crazy conspiracy theorist, but this is actually what's going on real time in the world
exactly
right
what's
now.
Going on.
Yeah, it's something.
People like Brett McCurk, I don't know if you know him, the former Syria guy for Obama, Brett McCurk.
Yep.
The ring bell, and people like Preet Bharara.
Yep.
They initially pretended to respect the constitutional order to keep their jobs, so they could, secretly be part of the resistance, or how they call it, and undermine President Trump from the inside. But, I know a lot of people listening to me now on the other side are thinking, we're going to, mess with this guy. I'm sure they're angry with me coming out. But let me give them a message to them as well. I have a lot of information that I did not share, and messages from people like McCurk, that's going to be very damaging. So if I end up in a United States court, at some point I'm going to share this stuff. These guys are not well-intentioned. They're now, siding with Joe Biden. They're hiding their true face. A lot of them pretend to be something that they're not. And at some point, all of this stuff is going to come out. I mean, that's the thing with the truth. It has a tendency to come out.
It does, and especially when you've got it on your side like you do. You bide your time and do exactly what you just did, because that's the only thing that keeps these guys on their toes. There's no honor amongst thieves. It's all about leverage. Whatever leverage is available on other, that's how they operate in that world, I've learned very sadly.
Exactly. The prosecution said the fact that General Flynn and me are saying the same thing during Bijan's trial. They said Flynn and Ekim Alptekin are saying the exact same thing. This is evidence. They told this to the jury. They made the jury believe that this is evidence that we coordinated our stories. Nothing can be further from the truth. We never even met or spoke after he became the National Security Advisor. We never coordinated anything. The reason we're telling the same story is because it's the truth. And that's why our story will outlast theirs.
I agree. This is fantastic. I really love talking to you. We have like 2 more minutes left, but I just what is next steps for you now? I remember General Flynn's first letter when he came out in public again. He said, "I'm not done."
I just want to tell whoever's listening that I'm not done either. I'm going to stay the course and fight this thing, and we'll see what happens.
Good for you. Where can people support you? This is, I mean, I'm just so glad I met you. Now you're never going to get rid of me. Where can people support you on the web if you need some legal fund help, I believe.
Yeah, I do actually. I mean, I try to do it by myself, but it's just not doable. And I think they're doing it on purpose. They keep making sure that your legal bills pile up, because it's one of the ways that they pressure you to basically lie and tell their story. They wanted me to give up General Flynn, and at this point, imagine if I would. At this point, if I would come out and say, you know what, you're right, General Flynn did this and this. I mean, it would be absolute disaster, and that's what they want me to do, and I'll never do that. I'll never do it.
It's at EKIMDefenseFund.org. That's where you can go to find the defense fund, because he's too humble to share it himself. I'll do it for him. And
thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome.
Means the world to me. Thank you.
No, of course. And thank you so much for joining us today. This is going to be really beneficial, and I'm sure that we should have you back to go over some more of those details that you said. As an investigative journalist, hearing that, it just kind of, the light bulb went off and my ears perked up. So, we'll have you back again.
Great. I really enjoyed talking to you. And say hi to the United States for me.
Oh, you're doing it right now. So,
okay.
Well, thank you.
On that deal. So we'll see. Tropical Depression 13 could develop into Hurricane Laura this weekend as it nears South Florida. National Weather Service meteorologist Robert Garcia says we are in the 5-day cone of uncertainty.
We have the unsettled weather ahead here heading into the weekend. Through the weekend, we're going to continue to gain a better perspective as to what Tropical Depression 13 could mean for our region.
There's a 20 to 30% chance South Florida could feel tropical storm force winds Sunday. This is USA Radio News.
Working from home? I'm Chad Dodd, veterinarian and consultant to Limp Bells. Here are some tips for keeping your dog fit while staying at home. Find 15 minutes twice a day